The morning after the last snow surrendered to the tremulous kiss of spring found Jon Snow walking the ramparts of Castle Black, boot heels ringing on stone dark as a crow's wing. The wall behind him was a crumbling white leviathan half-shrouded in melt fog, shedding centuries of ghost ice in slow weeping rivulets. Above, sky and frost steam mingled until the world's edge seemed an uncertain smear of pewter. Jon paused, gloved hand resting on crenellation, and listened to the meltwater patter below, each drop like the ticking of some great patient clock measuring out the North's fragile peace. He had slept scarcely an hour. When he did close his eyes, memories prowled. Ghost wolves howling over broken fields, the purple flash of dragonfire on snow, the Night King's hand shattering like blue glass. Even victory had tasted of ash. Yet dawn came just the same, and with it, obligations that could not be set aside. The free folk camped in the New Gift waited for word of where they might build homes that would not be razed at a lord's whim. The northern houses expected their Lord Snow. Some still refused king in the north. Some refused snow altogether. To tell them how their ruined villages would be rebuilt, without the taxes those same villages yield. Southward, whispers spilled that a boy king in King's Landing meant to levy new oaths, and the Iron Bank's ravens spoke of debts as tall as the wall. He thought of it all, and felt the weight in his chest, a sensation like chainmail soaked through and frozen to flesh. Duty is the death of love, Maester Aemon had once warned. Jon wondered what the old Maester would say of duty when all the traditional ties of kinship, Stark, Targaryen, Wildling, Night's Watch, had been upended and knotted into new shapes no one yet understood. Shouts drifted up from the yard as a dozen free folk youths sparred with wooden spears under the wary eye of Sir Tormund Giantsbane. He had learned to bear the southern title with gruff amusement. Beside Tormund stood a shorter, grayer figure. Sir Davos Seaworth, hands tucked beneath his cloak, offering quiet corrections. The sight drew a faint smile to Jon's lips. Seafolk and raiders of the Frostfangs, sweating side by side under the same pale sun. If that small miracle could take root, perhaps larger things were possible. The clang of the guard's handbell startled the morning calm. Jon turned toward the south gate, where the lift cage screeched upward. A single rider emerged. Alyce Karstark, her black and white cloak sodden from the road, hair braided tight against the wind. She strode across the courtyard, boots splashing through puddled slush, and did not slow until she reached the foot of the stairs that led to Jon. "Messages from Winterfell," she called up. "Your sister writes with urgency." Jon descended, meeting her halfway. Alyce's cheeks were raw from cold, but her gaze was clear, steady. "Sansa?" he asked. "And Lady Brienne," Alyce answered, pressing a wax-sealed roll into his palm. "They have summoned the northern lords to moot in Winterfell's great hall 3 days hence." "For what purpose?" Alyce hesitated, then lowered her voice. "To decide whether the free folk may settle south of the wall, and whether you still hold their fealty." Jon's fingers tightened around the message, the stark direwolf broken by his thumb. Memory flared, Sansa in the Solar, eyes bright with relief when Arya returned. Sansa in the Godswood, tears silently trail-frosted when they spoke of Bran's distance. She had learned to carry power lightly, but firmly. If she meant to test him now, it would not be from malice. Rather from fear. Fear that what remained of House Stark could be swept aside by the same tides of change that had drowned so many others. He thanked Alyce, sent her to warm herself in the kitchens, and climbed again to his tower chamber. Ghost dozed on the hearthstones, one red eye cracked open. Jon knelt beside the direwolf, resting a hand on the broad, scarred skull. Ghost huffed, as if to say he too sensed storms upon the horizon. Jon broke the seal. The parchment smelled faintly of oak smoke and rosewater. Sansa's usual blend. Her script was elegant but firm, every line exact. She wrote of dwindling grain stores in the rills, of White Harbor's crippled fleet, and the towering cost of rebuilding the docks. Of the free folks' hunting parties ranging south as far as the Barrowlands and unsettling small folk who still regarded them as raiders. Most of all, she wrote of fear. Fear that the tenuous calm might fracture into a dozen petty wars if old wounds were not salved quickly and publicly. Thus the moot, a gathering of lords, landed knights, guild masters, septons, maesters, and, unprecedented in northern annals, chieftains of the free folk. At the letter's end, Sansa had added a single line in her smaller private hand. "Bring them, Jon. Make them see what we have seen. If you fail, all this ends in fire." He read that line thrice before folding the parchment. Then he wrote 4 summons of his own, bidding Tormund, Mother Mole, the Magnar of Then, and Val, whom many called the Wildling Princess though she laughed at the title, to meet him in the commander's solar by midday. He sent another raven to Winterfell. "I come. I bring chiefs and chants alike. Have bread enough for both." By noon the sky had brightened, clouds parting to reveal a fragile blue, as though the heavens themselves were uncertain how long they dared show softness. Jon stood at the solar's battered oak table, the surface scored by decades of commanders scraping quills and daggers across it. Candles guttered in brass pans, pooling wax over old maps of the haunted forest. Tormund entered first, filling the doorway with fur and red beard. His laughter preceded him, though no jest had been told. "Snow," he greeted, clamping a hand the size of a ham on Jon's shoulder. "You look like a man who swallowed a porcupine arse first." "Feel like one too," Jon admitted. Next came Val, pale hair bound with a strip of golden leather, eyes as blue as glacial melt. She carried herself with the easy grace of a spearwife, but wore a gown of undyed wool that brushed the floor, concession to southern sensibilities. She inclined her head to Jon without smiling, yet he saw approval in her gaze. Val was not prone to flattery. If she came, she believed in his purpose. Rattleshirt, though now he went by Lord of Skulls, only in children's songs, arrived wrapped in a cloak of patched brown, clinking faintly where bits of bone still decorated his belt. The Magnar of Then followed, his bald pate seamed with crimson ink, tiny ice crystals catching in the grooves. Mother Mole last, stooped and wide-eyed, her cloak sewn with tiny bells that chimed as she shuffled inside. A dozen others waited in the corridor. Spearwives, raiders, a thin girl named Rowan, who had once guided Bran Stark through the wild, then faded back to her people. When the door shut, Jon laid out Sansa's summons, the moot, the need for some formal accord. He spoke of the free folks' right to choose where they lived, of the North's need for strong arms and freer thought, of the larger threats that could rise if they fell to stabbing one another over pasture land and pride. He expected interruption, challenge. Instead, silence filled the room, thick as boiled oats. Finally, Tormund scratched his beard. "You want us to sit with kneelers and talk at a wooden table? Use little cups and long words?" He spat into the hearth. "Wildlings not made for that." Jon held his gaze. "Free folk are made for surviving. Survive this, and the next winter we face together will not find us divided." Val's voice cut through the air. "Survive talk, you mean?" "Survive trust," Jon answered. Mother Mole's bells tinkled as she laughed. "Talk is cheaper than rabbit fur in summer. Trust's dearer than dragon glass these days. What promises do you carry, Snow?" "None I can write in blood," Jon said. "Only a chance to be heard." The Magnar slammed his fist on the table. "Words will not feed my children." "No," Jon agreed. "But alliances might. The lords of the North have granaries still. They have fields ready for seed. Share the harvest, share the fight, share the winter, or face each other's swords when snow returns." Rattleshirt grinned behind yellow teeth. "You speak like a crow and a green boy both." Jon felt heat bloom beneath his collar. He drew Longclaw and set the Valyrian steel gently upon the table between them, the stone wolf-head pommel catching candlelight. "I speak like one who has bled for both sides of the wall, like one tired of burying good folk while the bad prosper." He met each gaze in turn. "I ask you to stand with me at Winterfell. Not with thrown spears or drawn blades, but with words, hard as iron, plain as bone. Give the lords your truth. Make them look you in the eye. If after that they still deny you homes, then I will not stop your march south. I will march with you." He breathed, hearing his heart thunder. "But give peace its one chance. The bells on Mother Mole's cloak stilled as she ceased her rocking. 500 years, crows and kneelers named us savages. You are kin to both, and neither. Why should the lords trust you? Men. They trust Sansa Stark, Jon answered. And Sansa Stark trusts me. Saying her name set some small ache thrumming behind his ribs. I fail her now, I fail us all. Val stepped to the table. She laid a single arrow beside Longclaw, black shaft, gray fletching. One arrow for one promise, she declared. I will sit at your moot, Snow. If peace has a tongue, let us hear its song. Mother Mole followed, plucking a tiny bell from her sleeve and placing it next to the arrow. Bell for bell, she murmured. Let the masters of castles hear us ring. Tormund shrugged off his bear fur cloak and dropped it across the map, burying the wall beneath shaggy brown. A giant's bane never hides behind stone when there's feasting to be done. I'll drink their wine, spit in their fire, and see if their hearts are warmer than their halls. The Magnar grunted and added a shard of obsidian to the pile. Stone remembers oaths. Jon nodded gratitude to each of them. Rattleshirt folded his arms, eyeing the growing collection of tokens with undisguised amusement. At last he unhooked a small bone whistle from his belt and flicked it onto the table. So the dead may dance if these talks turn dull, he said. Jon gathered the objects carefully. Arrow, bell, shard, cloak, whistle, and wrapped them in soft leather. Tokens of a fragile future, he thought. He would present them to Sansa as proof. The free folk came not as supplicants, but as equals willing to barter honor against suspicion. Ravens flapped southward that same evening, beating across a sky luminous with sunset gold. Jon's message to Winterfell was spare. 20 leaders of the free folk ride within the day. Expect them with banners of white cloth. Prepare space enough for their horses and their pride. Bread, salt, and voice. He did not sign as king or lord or commander, only as Jon. He no longer knew which mantle fit. Dawn the next morning saw pack horses laden, riders half-armored, Ghost pacing restlessly at the gates. Ser Davos volunteered to guide the vanguard south along the King's Road, while Jon remained to settle the Watch's affairs. Tormund refused to let Davos ride alone. He insisted Jon travel at the head, else some jumpy Karstark archer decide white furs marked an enemy rather than a guest. They compromised. Jon and Tormund would ride first with a dozen free folk scouts. Davos would follow with the main party 3 leagues behind. The wall shadow dwindled quickly once they crossed the Bridge of Skulls, its stones darkened by melt, but still slick with ancient blood. Jon glanced back only once, seeing the massive white spine recede into haze, and felt both smaller and strangely unburdened. The journey south passed through landscape half-healed, half-scarred. Villages burned by the dead's advance now sprouted timid green from charred soil. Frozen rivers ran thin torrents, carrying broken ice downstream like funeral barges. At dusk on the second day, they reached Queen's Crown, where Mance Rayder had once been captured. The ruined keep jutted from a low hill, its blackened tower leering over still water. Jon elected to camp on the far bank, wary of stirring ghosts. Around the fires that night, free folk exchanged tales with men of the Watch. Though there were fewer crows now, many having chosen to follow Jon out of vows as ancient as the wall. The talk flowed cautious at first, then warmer as ale did its subtle work. Jon sat listening, knees drawn to his chest, Longclaw across his lap. In the flicker of flame he saw laughter where once there had been snarls, glimpses of children playing tag around sleeping horses. A spearwife teaching a Southron boy a song of the far north lights. Peace, he thought, looked like this. Not banners signed and sealed, but simple moments strung together against the dark. He held the thought as one holds a fragile bird, fearing any sudden move might crush it. On the third day they climbed the winding cut of the last river valley. Froth hissed along granite boulders, mountain ash bloomed in blood-red clusters. By noon they came upon Karhold men standing shoulder to shoulder across the track, spears leveled. Their captain, a lank man with a scar like a white worm across his cheek, barked for the wildlings to turn back. Tormund rode forward, laughter booming, and the Karstark pikemen flinched at his bulk. Jon urged his mare beside him. I am Jon Snow. "Sworn brother to Lady Sansa Stark," he called. "I bear invitation to Winterfell for these folk behind me." The captain's spear wavered. He peered past Jon to the painted shields and mismatched armor of the free folk. "My orders say naught of wildlings." "Your orders predate our century then," Tormund roared. He wheeled his horse in a circle, furs flying. "Tell your lord that the free folk ride south under peace banners, or tell him I'll use his beard to line my boots." Jon raised a hand. "No threats. Captain, send a rider. We will wait." The scarred man glanced up valley, uncertainty creasing his brow. At last he nodded to a younger soldier, who kicked his pony and galloped toward Carhold's distant watchtower. Hours slipped by. The sun slid perilously near the peaks. Some free folk shifted restlessly, fingers drumming spear shafts. But none broke rank. When the rider returned, he carried a white scarf knotted around his arm. "The Lady of Winterfell vouches for your passage," the captain announced. He stood aside and the line of pikes parted. As Jon led his column through, he met the Karstark's eyes and found respect there, cautious yet genuine. Small victories, he thought. Pebbles in a landslide to come. 2 nights later, they reached the outskirts of Winterfell. Smoke curled from rebuilt chimneys. Banners hung limp on the walls. Gray direwolf, flayed man, white bear, silver trout, though no wildling sigils flew. Yet the gate stood open, torches blazing. Jon's heart quickened as the familiar scent of pine tar and hot bread wafted on the wind. He rode beneath the portcullis and into the open courtyard, where once he had sparred with Robb and Theon. Now dozens of figures crowded around. Knights in dull plate, farmers in patched cloaks, maesters in gray, spearwives clutching hunting bows, littlings wide-eyed at the direwolf padding beside Jon's stirrup. From the top of the stone steps, Sansa descended, midnight cloak rippling, hair a river of embers under torchlight. Beside her walked Arya in simple leathers, gaze sharp as Valyrian steel. Behind them loomed Lady Brienne, and to one side, the green-robed maester, Edison Peake, who had replaced Maester Luwin after the Ironborn sack long years past. Jon dismounted, handing reins to a stable boy who gawked at Ghost before scurrying off. He bowed to Sansa. She stepped forward and embraced him, arms tight. When they parted, tears glimmered unshed in her lashes, but her voice held steady. "Brother." She looked past him to the free folk. "And friends." Her words rang across the courtyard. "Winterfell welcomes you. Bread and salt await within." Then a murmur rose among the wildlings. Surprise, relief, disbelief. Tormund strode up, towering over maesters and knights alike, seized a loaf from a passing servant, and took a hearty bite. "Bread's good," he declared, crumbs flying. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sansa's smile turned wry. "Let's keep some for the feast, Giantsbane." Arya was suddenly at Jon's side, slipping a warm hand into his. "They'll judge you for every breath," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Make each one count." He squeezed her fingers. "Help me, little sister." "I will," Arya said, and vanished among the guests like a darting shadow cat. Inside the great hall, tables ran the length of the stone floor, groaning beneath fresh-baked loaves, wheels of goat cheese, wheels of onion pie, and steaming joints of boar glazed with honey. Candle flames shimmered upon the newly mended roof beams, still bearing scorch marks from dragonfire long extinguished. The free folk entered warily, but when Sansa personally offered each chieftain a trencher and cup of spiced beer, the tension eased. Rattleshirt found himself seated beside Lady Barbary Dustin, who eyed his bone whistle with morbid fascination, while Val spoke quietly with Mage Mormont about island fishing yields. Jon sat at the high table flanked by Sansa and Davos. Below, Ghost lay curled protectively at his feet, eyes following every motion. The murmur of voices rose to a warm roar. Yet beneath it Jon sensed currents. Factions aligning, suspicions simmering, old slights ripening into new grievances. Tonight they feasted. Tomorrow they would face the council. He watched Sansa lift her cup to quiet the hall. In the hush, she spoke. "Friends, we gather after darkness that nearly swallowed us all." The The wall has held back ice and shadow for 8,000 years. But now people, not stones, must stand between chaos and our children. Tomorrow we convene a council unlike any before. Lords and ladies of the North, Guildmasters of White Harbor, Septon Acklin of the Seven, Mother Mole of the Free Folk, the Magnar of then, and others still to come. She sat. Applause followed, hesitant, then strong. John took his turn, rising amid the echoes. He looked down the length of trestles at 100 faces, scarred, weary, hopeful. He thought of the tokens wrapped in leather, now tucked against his breast. Arrow, bell, shard, cloak, whistle. Promises etched in humble materials, but perhaps no less durable than iron. Tomorrow, he said, voice carrying, we begin a choosing. It is not between wilding and kneeler, between castle and campfire. It is between fear and trust. I stood on both sides of that choice. I know the price of choosing wrongly. So tonight I ask each of you, whether you hail from Carhold or Hardhome, Bear Island or the Fist of the First Men, to remember the faces you sat beside at this table. Remember the taste of their bread, the sound of their laughter. Let that guide your tongue when tempers flare. Nashri. He paused, letting silence settle soft as snow. We have seen what divides us. Walls of ice, words of hate, wars waged by kings long dead. Let us see what unites. Breath, heartbeat, hunger, hope. Tomorrow, we test whether steel or speech better serves the living. I pray we answer well. He raised his cup. Across the hall, cups lifted. 100 voices spoke as one. To the living. That night, John could not sleep. Moonlight silvered the courtyard where sentries paced behind glimmering ghosts of banners. From the window of his old tower room, he watched a pale mist drift across the godswood, curling around the heart tree's crimson leaves. Ghost whined softly, then trotted downstairs toward the godswood path. Tail low, John followed in cloak and boots. The air among the weirwood smelled of damp earth and resin. The face carved in the heart tree regarded him with solemn red eyes. He knelt, pressing palms to the cold roots, and felt a tremor run through him like distant thunder. In the hush he thought he heard the whisper of leaves, a voice older than language, telling him paths branch and rejoin like frost fractures on a window pane. One choice could ripple through generations. He bowed his head. I don't know if I am the one to do this, he murmured. A breeze stirred the leaves, and in it he fancied he caught a scent. Wolf fur, cold iron, wild mountain thyme, the mingled heart of north and beyond. He stood, steadier. Ghost emerged from shadow, licking his hand. Together, they returned to the keep. The council convened at dawn in the solar above the great hall. 6 fireplaces lining the walls to keep the chill at bay. Sansa had arranged a round table so no seat lay visibly above another. Yet the proximity of old enemies bred tension nonetheless. Lord Serwyn sat stiff beside the Magnar, as though expecting a shout to erupt into a brawl. Lady Molan of the Rills fidgeted with her rings whenever Mother Mole's bells jingled. Davos, seated between Sir Kaelan Nori and a one-armed wildling named Barak, wore a look of patient resignation, as if he expected to spend the morning translating courtesy into common sense. John opened the session by inviting each leader to speak. No interruptions. Lord Glover began, citing centuries of raids. Tormund responded in turn, speaking of winters so cruel mothers ate snow to give children the last bite of crow meat. Val told of daughters stolen by White Walkers, of cradle songs drowned in ice. Lady Dustin recounted the sacking of Barrowton by Ramsay Bolton, and asked whether free folk would stand against such cruelty if it wore a Southron face again. One by one, grievances spilled like water from a cracked skin, soaking the table until the grain darkened. John listened until the stories blended into one long lament for a land racked by danger, pride, and famine. When silence at last fell, he produced the leather pouch and set its contents on the table. Tormund's bare fur cloak, still smelling of pine and smoke. Val's arrow, precise, unbroken. Mother Mole's bell, tiny, gleaming silver. The Magnar's black glass shard. Rattleshirt's bone whistle, its hole cracked where a dead man's tooth once fit. He spoke of what each token signified: willingness to trade fear for faith, to meet in halls of stone rather than on battlefields of snow. He asked the northern lords to place tokens of their own, symbols of lands they wished to protect, people they swore to keep fed. Slowly, hesitantly, they did. Lord Serwyn laid down a carved wooden calf. Lady Mormont offered a small stone bear, worry smooth from years in a pocket. Septon Ackland produced a shard of 7-pointed crystal. Maester Peak set a quill blackened with dragonglass ink. The pile grew, a mosaic of hope made from talismans humble and odd. "Here's our map," John said quietly. "Not of borders, but of burdens shared. Let us build from this." Debate surged anew: where free folk might farm, what levies they might pay, how trade could flow along rivers once choked by bodies. Yet, each time voices climbed toward fury. Someone, Arya flicking a pebble, Davos clearing his throat, Sansa meeting eyes, would gesture to the heap of tokens. The sight drew anger back like a tide retreating over stones. Hours passed. Candle stubs guttered. Quills scratched on fresh parchment. By dusk they had crafted a draft. A council of peace to sit twice each moon, comprised equally of castle lords and free folk chiefs, empowered to settle disputes without bloodshed. Free folk would receive tracts of land in the new gift, tax-free for 5 years, but bound to contribute patrols along the wall's gaps. Northern houses would provide seed grain and lumber in exchange for wildling guides through the Broken Tooth passes, opening new trade to the east. Sansa insisted on an addendum. Any future king south of the Neck must recognize the council's autonomy, else face united resistance. The final sticking point concerned the Night's Watch itself. Samwell Tarly, summoned from Old Town but yet to arrive, was named potential Lord Commander, but many argued the Watch no longer served purpose now that the dead were gone. Mother Mole suggested the Black Brothers could become stewards of the council, mediating and guarding the wall's remains. Rattleshirt proposed turning their castles into freeholds for mixed families, half Kneeler, half Spearwife. Debate stretched into candleless gloom before table adjourned for the morrow. John stepped into the courtyard, lungs aching with spent discourse. The night was warm enough that mist did not freeze on breath. He found Sansa leaning on a parapet, stars mirrored in her eyes. "You kept them talking," she said, voice hoarse. "7, bless you." "It wasn't me," John answered, thinking of bells and arrows. "It was all of us." She touched his sleeve. "Whatever they may say after, you brought them this far." The wall's silhouette loomed faint in the north, a pale scar under moonrise. John wondered if, in years to come, parents would point to it and tell children wild tales of ice demons and dragon queens, scarcely believing. He hoped one tale they remembered was of a council born from hunger and healed by choice. But he knew peace cracked as easily as bone. Tomorrow they must seal parchment with wax, and wills with steel, if need be. Yet as Sansa's hand rested atop his, and the distant campfires of free folk flickered alongside northern torches, John allowed himself the smallest ember of faith. It glowed within him as the night wind combed his hair, and for a heartbeat he felt the north breathe in unison, men and women, Kneelers and free folk, all inhaling the same cold promise. Tomorrow they would see whether breath became bond. Sleep claimed him near dawn. He dreamed of standing before a vast heart tree, whose branches pierced clouds. Around its roots lay tokens uncountable. Bells and bones, shards and feathers, rings and ribbons, forming a circle wide as Winterfell's walls. Snow fell warm upon his shoulders, each flake a whispered name. Ygritte, Ed, Gren, Lyanna, Rhaegar, Ned. The names melted into water, water into soil, soil into roots. The tree thrummed, immense and alive, and when John woke, he carried that hum within his ribs like a second heartbeat. He dressed in plain black wool, no armor, long claw slung across his back, more burden than badge. The council would meet again in the yard, under open sky. Sansa argued sunlight might cool tempers. Arya muttered it would simply make blood easier to see. John split the difference. He ordered trestles moved outside, but ringed them with shields, symbolic barriers rather than walls. As first light gilded the towers, bells rang. A clear, delicate chime. Mother Mole approached, her cloak new sewn with pale green thread, bells polished. She smiled at John. "Hear that?" she asked. "Wind carries courage." Soon the yard filled. Lords donned lighter cloaks. Free folk wore proud scars like medals. Samuel arrived, puffing on a shaggy brown rouncy, scroll cases bouncing at his hip. He nearly tumbled from the saddle when he saw John, then hugged him fiercely. "I came as quick as quill and hoof allowed," Sam exclaimed. "Archmaester Marwyn sends a tome on Dornish peace councils. Thought it might help. Never went in Ramsey." John grinned despite himself. "If it has pictures, the lords may read it." Sam flushed. "Well, some." They took seats. Sansa called order. Scrolls were unrolled. One roll of wax-sealed parchment with 27 signatures, Lord-in-Chief alike, sealed with river clay or blood ink or boar hair. Maester Peake cleared his throat to read the charter. Silence reigned as words poured forth. Fair borders defined from Queen's Crown to the Silver Hills. Grain quotas, shared patrol duties, rights to gather deadwood, prohibitions on slave-taking or forced tithes, a school at Long Barrow, open to all children. Black brothers reforged as wardens of the gift. When Peake finished, quills scratched again as final marks were added. The Magnar pressed his palm so hard a bead of blood seeped through parchment. Sansa dripped stark blue wax and stamped the direwolf. John signed last. Simply John, letting the capital stand alone like a sword in snow. A murmur rolled outward, growing into applause. Tormund whooped and hoisted the Magnar onto his shoulders. The then looked startled, then roared victory. Mother Mole's bells rang wild. Ghost barked, tail whipping, yet not all cheered. Lord Ruth frowned, arms folded. Sir Creighton Longbow stalked away, muttering about broken traditions. John knew discontent would linger like smoke in rafters, but smoke could clear if given wind. He climbed a makeshift dais, parchment in hand. "This," he said, "we call the Accord of the Broken Wall." The name came to him as he spoke. May it hold strong where stones failed. Today we choose talk over terror. Tomorrow the work begins, fields to plow, watchtowers to mend, children to teach both runes and rhymes. There will be disputes, but the council will meet. There will be hurt, but healers will cross these new borders. There will be fear, but courage is nothing without it. He lifted the charter. Sunlight lit the vellum like translucent ice, glowing every inked line. "Let this be our shield," he said. Sansa joined him, raising her hand. "And let Winterfell stand witness." She turned so her voice carried across ramparts. "By bread and salt, by earth and blood, the North welcomes the free folk as neighbors and kin." Cheers erupted, rolling like thunder until it seemed the stones themselves reverberated. Women wept, warriors beat sword hilts on shields. Across the yard John saw Val watching him, arrow tucked into her belt like a promise fulfilled. Sam beamed. Arya stood atop a barrel, grinning wolfish. In that roar John felt something loosen inside him. A knot he'd carried since first donning black at 14. It unraveled, leaving warmth behind. He thought of Aemon's words again. Love is the death of duty. But perhaps duty, when shared, could be the birth of love. A love not of hearts, but of hearths, of land and life intertwined. He breathed deep. The wall might crumble, kings might rise and fall. But today men and women chose to build rather than burn. He stepped down from the dais into the crush of bodies, free folk slapping his back, lords clasping forearms. Amid the tumult, he found Tormund, who lifted 2 cups of ale. "Here is to you, Lord Crow," Tormund bellowed. "To us," John corrected, clinking cups. They drank. Ale washed over his tongue, bitter and bright. Above, ravens circled against the blue like ink splashed on parchment. John watched them wheel, wondered what songs they carried, and for the first time in many moons, allowed himself to envision a tomorrow unmarred by war. It was not certainty he felt. Peace had no certainties, but possibility, fragile and immense as dawn on fresh snow. He held it close as the council dispersed, as children chased one another between stalls, as Ghost leaned warm against his leg. The day stretched ahead, full of arguments yet to be settled, fences yet to be mended, wounds yet to heal. The work of peace had only begun. Jon Snow rolled his shoulders, set his cup upon a barrel, and strode toward the stables where horses waited for a patrol ride along the new gift. There were boundary stones to place, farmers to reassure, scouts to instruct. Around his neck the chill breeze whispered of ice, still melting far to the north, of seasons turning. He answered with steady breath and forward step. A man walking into history not as king or crow but as bridge. And bridges, he knew, held best when many hands laid the stones. Away. Wand. The smoke of the midday cookfires drifted across Winterfell's outer ward in gauzy ribbons, carrying the scents of oat bread, boiling turnips, and roasting goat. Jon Snow stood in the slanted sunlight beyond the smithy arches, watching sparks flare white-hot where Mikken's boy hammered rivets into a barrel hoop. Every clang sounded like a distant echo of the swords that once rang here in rage, reminders of what had been risked to gain a single tenuous dawn of peace. Beyond the forges, free folk children chased piglets between piles of fresh-cut timber. A northern mason shouted half-hearted scolds, more ritual than reproach, while guiding a crane sling so a beam could rest flush atop the courtyard's north colonnade. A day earlier those workers had knotted arms with spearwives to raise the first oak upright. Now the hall's rafters began to knit together overhead, an interlaced skeleton promising a roof where the Council of Peace might soon convene without fear of snow or spying winds. Jon inhaled wood dust and steam from the dye pots, feeling life pulse through the stones like warm blood at last. That sensation steadied him, yet he could not dismiss the prickle along his shoulders. Change might sprout in these courtyards, but the roots lay shallow. The next hard gale could tear them free before they anchored. Already he'd heard mutters. A pair of Riswell outriders swore they'd glimpsed free folk cutting hawthorn from their lord's sacred barrows, though Brynja of the Antlered River denied it hotly. Tormund thumped Jon's back in jest about those stiff-neck kneelers. But Jon saw the storm clouds in the old raider's eyes. Words could knit wounds only so far before scarred tissue cracked again. Footfalls clicked on the flagstones behind him. Jon turned to find Samwell Tarly edging beneath the smithy lintel, cheeks smudged with ink, eyes bright. "Jon," Sam said, puffing as though he'd sprinted from the rookery. "I've copied 6 charters onto fair parchment. No grease stains this time, but the lords want them translated into the southern script, so King Tommen's regents cannot claim ignorance. And Maester Peake worries over seals. He says Riverclay won't impress the conclave." "Nine hour pay." Jon brushed soot from his glove. "Use beeswax." The beekeepers of Hornwood pledged 4 combs a month. Let the first comb serve peace. Sam nodded, made to turn, then halted. "There's more." He tugged a fresh scroll from his belt. A message from Deepwood. Sabel Glover reports 3 fishing dhows, bearing Lannister colors, anchoring off the bay near Torhind Square. The captains request audience with the council. "She fears some trick." "Lannister colors," Jon repeated. "Has King Tommen's hand sent word?" "Nothing yet." Jon's gaze shifted to the ramparts where Karstark sentries paced. Golden lions north of the neck could unravel everything. "Tell Sabel to extend guest right," he said slowly. "But send riders to me the moment the captains set foot ashore. I'll convene an escort." Sam's mouth quirked. "Isn't that risky?" "Lannister envoys. Better we meet them on our terms," Jon replied. "Let them see the free folk standing guard beside northern knights. Symbols cut deeper than blades," my father said. Sam inclined his head. "I'll quill it now." Before he could hurry off, Jon caught his sleeve. "Sam, thank you. All of this, they don't grasp how much rests on your ink." Sam's flush deepened. "Ink is lighter than steel, but it stains longer," he murmured, and shuffled away, scrolls bobbing like fledglings in his arms. By dusk the sky glowed apricot over the battlements. Jon found Tormund Giantsbane at the practice butts, drilling a knot of teenage Karstarks and free folk alike. Shafts thudded into straw with dogged rhythm. Every so often a lad missed and Tormund's booming critique rolled across the yard like thunder. Aim your hips, not your hopes. Bend the bow as if you bend winter itself. Jon waited until the volley ceased, then called Tormund aside. The red-bearded chieftain wiped sweat from his brow with a forearm thick as an oak branch. "Riding out again?" Tormund asked, noting Longclaw strapped across Jon's shoulders. "Envoys sail from Lannisport," Jon said. "We meet them at Torrhen Square in 3 days. I'll need you and 24 free folk." Tormund's teeth flashed. "Showing crow's feathers to Lion Lord's eye. I'll bring 60. 24, Jon insisted. "Small enough not to threaten, large enough that no one threatens us. Choose warriors who know restraint." Tormund barked a laugh. "Restraint is a rare spice among my folk, Snow. Find what you can," Jon replied. "And no bone armor, no skull helms." "Bah," Tormund grumbled. "You strip a man of his rattles and expect him to dance dainty." Jon clapped his shoulder. "Dance is easier without chains." That night, Sansa met him in the library, parchment strewn between candelabra. Arya perched cross-legged on a table edge, idly flipping a dagger round its hilt. Brienne stood sentinel near the door, silent but vigilant. "We let Lannisters through our gates at our peril," Sansa pronounced, quill tapping. "Tommen's council may speak of trade alliances, but Casterly merchants whisper of new levies on northern timber. They'll want concessions." Jon leaned against a shelf, heavy with moldering annals. "Let them ask. The council gives nothing freely. But if King's Landing recognizes our charter, other realms may follow." "Edan." Sansa's eyes, clear and unblinking, searched his face. "Make them respect you, Jon. Not for dragons you never owned, nor for a crown you set aside. For the accord you forged." Arya flipped her dagger, caught it by the tip. "If they don't respect words, sharp steel corrects tongues," she said. "I can manage that." Brienne shifted uneasily. Jon inhaled, smelling dust and wax. "And the faint lavender oil Sansa preferred." "We lead with courtesy," he said. "Steel is last resort." Arya's grin held shadows. "Last resorts come sooner than first hope sometimes." Sansa later quilled down. "The North is tired of blood. So am I." She touched Jon's wrist. "Come home alive, that alone will speak loudest." Morning revealed a misty gray world. Frogs croaked in the moat. Ravens huddled on merlons. Jon's escort assembled in the bailey. 16 Karstark cavalry in black and white cloaks, 8 spearwives wearing boiled leather patched with direwolf sigils, Tormund astride a shaggy dun mare, and Val, pale cloak streaming, riding a stallion as white as the frosted moors. Jon raised an eyebrow at her inclusion. She met his glance, impassive. "Someone must remind Goldcloaks the free folk have queens too." Tormund chuckled. "Queens, princesses, all the same when they point an arrow." "Hush, Giant's Bane," Val said. But her smile undermined reproach. They left Winterfell past first light, hooves clopping over frost-bitten road. Ghost ranged ahead, wraith-like in the fog. Snowmelt had turned the King's Road soft. Wagons rutted the clay. Farmers paused mid-sowing to squint at the odd company. Karstark sigils mingled with white furs, ghostwolf padding. Most offered tentative waves, some spat and warded with sign of the father. Jon nodded to all. Fear fled slower than ravens. At camp that night beneath towering birches, Jon walked the perimeter. He found Val kneeling by the embers, polishing the moon-carved tip of her elk-bone spear. Her eyes tracked him calmly. "You trust these southern lords?" she asked without prelude. "I trust no lord wholly," Jon said, crouching opposite her. "But I trust that they bleed. Bleeding things bargain rather than die." "Some bargain cheap," she murmured, running cloth along the shaft. "The women of Craster bargained for shelter, bore children for it, then found no peace. I remember their laments." Jon's gaze softened. "I remember too. This council cannot erase past cruelties. It can only promise different choices." Val nodded, though shadows lingered in her stare. "I saw the heart tree in Winterfell. Your red god inside the bark, will it guard us?" "The old gods watch," But they seldom guard, Jon said. We guard each other. She considered that, then secured her spear and rose. Sleep while you can, Snow. Morning brings lions. Men. On the third noon, the towers of Torrhen's Square rose from green meadow. Lord Helmund Tallheart, grey of beard and brisk of stride, greeted Jon at the drawbridge with arms spread. Lord Snow, beg pardon, I've heard you swear off titles, he said, offering a firm clasp. Call me Helmund then. Our guests arrived at dawn. 3 sleek cogs crewed light. I've demanded parley in the great hall. Demanded? Tormund muttered behind Jon. A parley begins poorly when one side demands. Helmund's mustache twitched. Indeed. They bring a letter bearing King Tommen's royal seal. Nantur. Jon dismounted. Show me. Inside the vaulted entry, an undermaester presented the scroll. Jon broke crimson wax. The lion and stag entwined. The words within bore Cersei Lannister's clipped formality, though signed in Tommen's child hand. By command of His Grace Tommen of the House Baratheon, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, we extend greetings and goodwill to the assembly styling itself the Council of Peace. Her Grace the Queen Mother dispatches Siren of the Golden Shore, Tybolt Lannister of Castamir's remnant, and Maester Orton Plum to confer on matters of allegiance and mutual defense. We request safe passage to Winterfell and assurance that the North remains subject to the Iron Throne. Jon folded the parchment. They ride under royal seal. Guest right stands. Helmund sighed. Our folk whisper Tybolt's. Father butchered Riverlanders at the Red Fork. Old wounds reopen easily. Better they reopen under a maester's eye than fester unseen, Jon said. He summoned the escort. The Lannister party awaited in the cobbled yard. A lean knight in gilded half-plate gripping a cloth-wrapped spear, a round-shouldered maester straightening crimson robes, and a young man Tybolt, whose Lannister gold hair fell to his collar in meticulous waves. Tybolt's expression when he spied the free folk mix flickered between disdain and fascination. Jon stepped forward. I am Jon Snow. Welcome to Torrhen's Square. Tybolt dipped a stiff bow. Lord Snow. Names suffice, Jon interjected. This is Tormund Giantsbane, Val of the Free Folk, Sir Kedge Karstark. Siren of the Golden Shore inclined his head scarcely a finger's breadth. Our journey is pressing. King Tommen expects timely report. We beg your escort north. You shall have it, Jon said. After we break bread. Guest right is law among free and landed alike. Maester Orton smiled thinly. A courtesy and a ritual. We are honored. Evening found them gathered in the oak-beamed feasting hall of Torrhen's Square. Platters of river trout, buttered leeks, and rye loaves circled. Jon watched Tybolt across the table, studying the interplay of free folk and northerners with cautious eyes. The maester fielded questions about King's Landing's granary fires. Siren kept his helm on the bench, right gauntlet always resting near sword pommel. The first tension flared when a spearwife named Coral rushed in yelling that 2 Lannister sailors had been caught skulking among the free folk horses. Siren rose at once, hand on blade. Tormund leapt up, beard bristling. Jon knocked his cup onto the dais with a deliberate clang. All eyes swung to him. This hall is sworn to peace, he said, voice low yet carrying. Explain. A Karstark guard hauled in the 2 sailors. Scruffy boys little older than 15. They carried this, the guard said, displaying a parchment map of the King's Road with charcoal marks along river fords. Siren's jaw tensed. Sailors may wander. They bear no arms. But they count ours, Tormund growled, jabbing the map. Tybolt Lannister's cheeks flushed crimson. I ordered no spying, he said sharply. My mother, Her Grace, sent us to negotiate, not reconnoiter. And yet, Val murmured, eyes cold. Jon took the map, tore it in half. The boys remain under watch until dawn. At first light, they rejoin their ship. Enough. He glanced at Tormund, whose fists unclenched reluctantly. Siren sat, gauntlet thumping. Dinner continued, strained but intact. When the last trenchers were cleared, John escorted Tybalt to a narrow balcony overlooking moonlit reeds. "You question your orders," John observed. Tybalt's mouth twisted. "You see too much. I used to stand where you stand. Scarcely of age, tasked to hold lies in my teeth. My counsel, weigh the lies before they rot your tongue." "Menkan." Tybalt stared into the misty marsh. "In King's Landing they call this treaty of yours rebellion." "I bow to no southern throne," John acknowledged. "But I battle no southern child king either. We claim self-rule, not war. Tell them so." "They will not hear it," Tybalt murmured. "The Queen Mother whispers of enemies in every shadow." "Then speak louder," John said. "Prove yourself more than a whisper." Tybalt met his gaze, uncertainty warring with budding resolve. "What is it you want?" "A north where children fear neither white nor winter nor Lannister steel." John answered. "Build trade, not tribute. Stand equal, not vassal." Tybalt exhaled. "Easier said than lodged in Casterly rock." "Ease was slain long ago," John replied. "We deal in hard truths." He left Tybalt pondering moonlit water. Dawn gathered pale and chill. The company formed column, Lannister envoys at center, Karstark outriders flanking, Tormund's spearwives trailing. Ghost trotted alongside Tybalt's palfrey, sniffing him with canine appraisal, until the young lion dared stroke the snow-white fur. Ghost accepted the touch. They traveled 2 days under placid sky. At each village, John arranged small councils. Free folk shared smoked venison, while Karstark smiths inspected plows. Tybalt observed keenly, jotting notes onto fresh vellum provided by Maester Orton. John watched layers of wariness peel from the envoy's brow. Late afternoon of the final march. Riders thundered from the north. Lady Alis Karstark at their head, braids whipped by wind. She reigned before John, base tense. "Scouts report Bolton banners on the ridge east of Widow's Watch," she said. "A raiding thorn, maybe. 80 men. They've torched a croft and seized sheep." "Bolton banners," John repeated, heart sinking. The flayed man still sowed terror, though the Dreadfort lay abandoned. "Frey. Stragglers. Unknown," Alice said. "The shepherd who escaped claims their leader is a pale man wearing Bolton pink." Tormund spat. "More bones to rattle then." Tybalt edged closer. "Who are these Boltons?" "Traitors who flayed my kin," John said flatly. "Many fled after Winterfell's retaking. Some hid south. Others lurk like ticks." Siren slit his sword free an inch. "We are envoys, not soldiers." John surveyed his troop. 23 combatants, if counting Lannister guards. The Boltons, 80 or fewer. Odds steep, yet letting them raid unopposed risked northern trust. He turned to Tybalt. "Ride on to Winterfell under Karstark guard. Present yourself to Lady Sansa with this." He handed over a small silver coin bearing the direwolf, his personal mark. "Tell her what you've seen." Tybalt's brows drew. "You intend to fight." "To protect the Accord," John said. "Peace cannot flourish if carrion still feed on fear." The young Lannister swallowed, then nodded. "I will carry your coin." Siren protested. "His safety is..." But Tybalt cut him off. "We go, sir. The North honors guest right." John watched them canter south, dust clouds curling. Then he faced his own men. "We ride light and strike fast. Tormund flank left along the alder stands. Val take 4 Oaks Knoll. Rain arrows but hold fire until I charge." Spearwives grinned. Karstark knights checked girths with grim focus. John mounted, Longclaw loosening in scabbard. The wind smelled of distant smoke. When they crested Widow's Ridge near dusk, flames licked a croft below. Figures in pink tabards herded bleating sheep into a pen. John counted 60. A horn's low moan signaled Tormund's flank ready. John lifted his sword, Silver Wolf's head glinting red in sunset. He spurred downhill. The clash unfolded quick and brutal. Val's arrows whistled, felling sentries before alarm rose. Tormund's roar shook the alder grove as free folk crashed into Bolton rear. John drove straight at the croft, parried a halberd swipe, shoulder-checked a man into mud, slashed Longclaw across another's thigh, Valyrian steel biting through boiled leather like parchment. Bolton men broke ranks under the twin assault. Some fled toward the moor, only to meet Karstark cavalry wheeling to cut escape. Jon's horse reared as a pike jabbed. He vaulted off, rolled, came up inside the pikeman's reach. Pommel struck his jaw. Firelight painted feral shadows. Voices cried surrender. Others keeled beneath spearwives' axes. Through the tumult, Jon spotted the leader. Pale-haired, gaunt, eyes fever-bright. He wielded a cruel flensing knife. Ghost lunged at him, jaws snapping. But the man whirled, blade catching the direwolf's flank. Ghost yelped, staggered. Rage blotted Jon's vision. He surged forward, parried the knife, drove his fist into the man's ribs. The Bolton staggered, spitting blood, then lunged in mad frenzy. Jon sidestepped, swept Longclaw across the pink tabard. Cloth and flesh parted. The man sagged. Jon knelt beside Ghost. Blood seeped from a shallow gash along the wolf's hindquarter. Ghost licked Jon's wrist. Eyes clear. The wound bled freely but looked clean. "Torment," Jon called. Giantsbane strode up, beard matted with soot, carrying the Bolton banner torn from its pole. "Gather prisoners, 10 at least." Jon sheathed Longclaw. Elwadi gathered her. We marched them to Winterfell. The fires were doused. Sheep meandered bleating into open pasture. Night settled thick, cool breeze fluttering the ragged flayed man, emblem clutched in Tormund's hand. "Burn it," Jon said and stepped away, pressing cloth to Ghost's wound. They reached Winterfell under slate clouds 2 dawns later. Bells pealed from battlements even at that early hour, a sound neither joyous nor alarmed, but summoning. Sansa met Jon at the gate, Tybalt and Arya behind her. Tybalt's expression held subtle awe. "We heard of your battle," Sansa said, touching Jon's arm. "No deaths among our escort?" "2 wounded, Ghost cut. He'll mend." Jon's gaze found Tybalt. "Winterfell received you. The lady's hospitality humbles," Tybalt said. "I've seen more in 3 days than court tales spun in years." Behind Jon, the Bolton prisoners stumbled up the causeway, wrists bound, eyes vacant. Sansa's mouth tightened. Old wounds indeed. Jon met her stare. Justice, not revenge. The council must decide their fate. Sansa inclined her head. "A full quorum sits tomorrow. Tybalt wishes to witness." She looked at the young lion who nodded stiffly, as though the weight of the choice already pressed him. Inside, corridors bustled with preparations. Maester Peake drafted charges. Mother Mole rehearsed with Septon Aclan a plea for mercy that balanced law with renewal. Lord Glover polished his best steel to display North's sternness. Jon visited Ghost in the kennels, changed the dressing. The direwolf licked his chin, impatience shining. That evening Jon climbed the rookery tower where Sam arranged cages and scrolls in neat array. The sky blushed purple above the snows of distant Frostfangs. "Birds ready?" Jon asked. Sam secured a latch. 6 ravens, each for a realm. The Vale, Riverlands, Stormlands, Reach, Dorne, and King's Landing. Copies of the charter, Tybalt's testimony, details of Bolton raid, and our joint response. Send them at sunrise. Jon leaned on the sill, gazing at the wall's faint line. If the Southern lords see free folk and Lannister ink on same parchment, perhaps they'll blink twice before grimacing. Sam exhaled, parchment fluttering. "Peace depends on men and women. I've never met making choices I can only imagine. It feels fragile." "Everything worth having is," Jon said quietly. "That's why we fight to keep it, each dawn anew." The council gathered in the half-finished hall, rafters overhead now sheathed in fresh pine boards, the smell of sap strong as any incense. Jon sat between Sansa and Val. Cross. Tybalt offered silent observation, Siren at his side. Prisoners were presented. 7 Bolton stragglers, bruised, shackles clinking. The pale leader, named Sir Harwin Skinner, refused to kneel. "A knight unrecognized," Lady Mormont snorted. "Titles surrender when oaths are broken," Master Peake intoned. Jon rose. Sir Harwin Skinner stands accused of murder, arson and terror against the North and its free folk allies. How plead you? Skinner spat blood-flecked phlegm. I kneel to no crow lover. Tormund guffawed. Arya twirled her dagger, eyes icy. Jon's voice stayed level. Then you stand for judgment. He turned to the council. What say you? Debate ensued, some urging execution, others urging wall service in rebuilt garrisons. Harwin jeered at both. Tybalt surprised many by speaking. In King's Landing, he said, traitors to the realm often lose heads, yet children still starve beside the Red Keep. I have witnessed these northern folk labor side by side, and I see more justice in building than in bleeding. Murmurs rose. Skinner bared teeth. A lion cub mewling about mercy, he sneered. But mercy is no mule, Tybalt retorted, voice steady. It is roar restrained. Jon felt a glimmer of pride for the young man. He surveyed the assembly. The wall needs wardens, he said. The free folk need masons. The watch needs farmers. Send these men to the ruins of Greyguard under guard. They rebuild what their forebears destroyed. 10 years service, then release. Mother Mole's bells chimed in approval. Lady Dustin frowned but nodded. The vote passed by raised hands and arrows. Tenants declared. Harwin Skinner sagged. Not victory, but justice served peace. Afterward, as torches were lit against gathering dusk, Tybalt approached Jon in the corridor. I will carry this tale south, he said. Not all will believe, but some will. Seeds. Jon clasped his forearm. Good travels, Tybalt of Casterly Rock. Tybalt hesitated. I leave Siren as witness. I return with coin and craftsmen, if the council permits. It does, Sansa said, appearing beside Jon. And if you bring grain ships too, the North remembers generosity. Tybalt bowed deeper than any Lannister ever bowed to a Stark. I shall try. Weeks blurred into the measured rhythm of rebuilding. Jon spent mornings inspecting boundary stones laid by mixed work parties. Men of House Reed teaching free folk how to weave wattled fences, then builders mortaring hearths in the empty weald. At noon he heard petitions, a dispute over salmon nets at the last river, a quarrel between spearwives and Mole's town miners about slate rights. Each grievance ended with compromise, not perfect, but accepted. June melt filled creeks with silver trout. Children from both sides of the old wall splashed under alder branches, unaware their laughter once would have been unimaginable. Jon found those moments eased the ache of long nights spent writing lists of iron nails, barley weights, sawyers needed. Sansa ruled Winterfell with calm grace, her ledger quills moving as swiftly as any sword. She brokered trade with Braavos for grain in exchange for northern timber. Val helped midwives deliver calves in Carhold. Her counsel on herbal poultices spread among healers. Tormund drilled joint patrols. Free folk scouting crooked gullies where smugglers sometimes slump. Ghosts flank healed Scarwhite. The direwolf resumed silent circuits around the walls at dusk. One starlit evening Jon sat on the battlements beside Arya. The wind tasted of heather. Below, a lantern-lit caravan wound in from the west. Manderly wagons bearing saltfish, trailed by horse litters carrying reach maesters, come to study the thaw. Arya kicked her heels. You know, she said, all this talking, feasting, judging, it's like dress practice for a play. But someday, someone will fling wildfire at our stage. Jon half smiled. Then we douse it with well water and keep acting. She nudged his shoulder. You ever wish you'd sailed with me in Gendry? Crossed the narrow sea, found the dragons of Yitai. Every time a scroll pile topples, he confessed. But peace is a voyage too. Stormy seas, strange shores. Arya's eyes glimmered. If you need a knife in the dark, call. I know, he said softly. Thank you. Autumn's first chill arrived with a parchment sealed in mottled green wax. The tree and moon of House Rowan. Lord Mathis Rowan of Golden Grove proposed shipment of apple rootstock north, intrigued by reports of then irrigation channels. This signaled the Reach's cautious interest, long hindered by Lannister overshadow. John read the letter at the council table. Davos arched an eyebrow. "Golden apples mean golden coin," he murmured. Maester Peak added, "And if the Reach endorses your charter, the Iron Throne must weigh isolation." Sansa penned reply, offering northern hothouse designs in exchange for rootstock. Trade, once a trickle, quickened, but not all tidings were welcome. Scouts returned with word of Ironborn reavers sacking a Nori fisheries hamlet. The council authorized a joint fleet. Manderley cogs crewed by free folk oarsmen used to polar currents to patrol the Bight. John sailed aboard the flagship Silver Dawn, wind whipping his cloak. The motley fleet cornered the Ironborn longship near the Wolf's Teeth. A swift skirmish ended with prisoners clapped in hold, and the Wolf's Teeth signal fire blazing a warning visible to 3 counties. The victory bolstered trust. Salt and Snowblood united. Yet rebellion wore many faces. A sullen Karstark cousin attempted to poison a free folk well near Greywater Watch. Caught. He confessed bitterness that his father died at Hardhome while wildlings now tilled Karstark fields. The council sentenced him to years' service, guiding children's classes on both sides of the gift. Education as penance. John visited the youth's first lesson. The lad stammered through tales of ancient first men meeting children of the forest. By the end, free folk tots tugged his cloak, chanting again. John rode home under stars, hope a steady drum within. Snow returned early that year, fine grains swirling over the half-rebuilt keeps of Westwatch. John stood atop its nascent tower, breath fogging. Beside him, Sam unfurled a scroll from Old Town. "The Conclave," Sam said, voice trembling, "recognizes the Council of Peace as lawful steward of northern medical lore. They dispatch a contingent of healers come spring." John exhaled white plume. "Then spring will grow more than barley." Below, torches flickered where Karstark stonecutters, and then ironsmiths warmed hands over shared brazier. Beyond Outerburn, free folk tents huddled close to watchtowers, snow dusting their hide panels. A lullaby drifted in wildling tongue, soft and steady as the fall of flakes. John closed his eyes, listening. Somewhere a raven croaked. Somewhere, the world's great wheel ground onward. Yet here, atop the reclaimed stones of a wall, once meant to divide, men and women gathered to shape future in their own blunt, earnest hands. He thought of the tokens still kept in his belt pouch: arrow, bell, glass, bone, fur. 5 humble vows. He imagined each buried under the tower's foundation, slate and snow compressing them into quiet permanence. Someday children would climb these walls unaware of bells or arrows. Only that the wind up here smelled of pine and sea and some sweeter thing between. Jon Snow breathed a mingled scent and opened his eyes to the soft swirl of night. He rested one hand on the frosted parapet, the other on Ghost's shaggy ruff. Above them, the aurora shimmered faint green, like distant banners of a kingdom, not conquered but shared. The free folk in the north were no longer foes, nor again exactly kin. Something new instead, as new as the first fragile buds daring winter to relent. Perhaps they would yet snap in some harsher gale, but tonight they bent together, not alone. Jon watched the shimmering veil drift, and when he spoke, it was a whisper, no stronger than snow. "Let the wall that lives be taller than the wall that fell." Ghost's low, contented growl was the only answer. And it was answer enough. E.K. Mighty. Winter deepened over the north. Snow falling not in angry sheets, but in soft, relentless hush. The world blanketed beneath a white silence that seemed to slow even the heartbeat of Winterfell. The ancient castle's towers, patched and mended, bore the burden of snow as if they remembered when all the world was only ice and wind, and the tales of men were as yet unwritten. Within those walls, the slow work of peace continued, tedious and real, built on arguments and compromise, on old pain and halting hope. Yet beyond the walls, across the vast spread of the new gift, something unprecedented grew. A mingling of people, custom, and promise, as uncertain as the pale winter sun. Jon Snow rose before the dawn most mornings, sleep troubled by dreams of wolves and dead men and burning fields, but woke always to the small practicalities of ruling what could not by any title, be truly ruled. The days were busy. A letter arrived from White Harbor. Lord Manderley's master of coin demanded free folk laborers swear the seven-pointed star before they might serve on the port's new piers. John penned a reply reminding the Manderleys that the free folk swore by wind, by night, by living and surviving, and that such vows were as binding as any made before altar or God. The next day, Manderley's dockyards found half their workers gone, vanished back into the wild woods beyond the city. But by week's end, Val herself arrived at White Harbor's gates, leading them home again with quiet words and a promise to oversee the work herself. The piers went up, stouter than before, and none spoke of oaths again. Other challenges swirled at every turn. In the fields near Barroton, southern merchant wagons were pelted by stones thrown by children who shouted, "Kneeler" and "Thief!" In the mists above Queen's Crown, 3 Karstark men vanished, and for a time, Wildland trackers and Northern Rangers searched together, side by side, their mutual suspicion softening at last when the men were found safe, trapped beneath a fallen pine. In Bear Island's cold woods, Lady Mormont herself called a moot of spearwives and clan mothers, inviting free folk matriarchs to sit in judgment over a dispute about salmon weirs. A quarrel that ended not in battle, but in shared fishing rights. A portion of the catch set aside for the orphans of both sides. Peace was not a story. It was a labor, an unending grind. For every handful of fields peacefully tilled, there were 3 yet to be cleared of brambles and the bones of the dead. For every child who learned letters in the new school at Long Barrow, where a free folk woman taught beside a northern septa, and sometimes the lesson ended in songs instead of prayers, there were elders who spat in the dust and remembered the days when no wildling would set foot south of the wall, save in chains. John carried these burdens. He made his rounds, winter cloak trailing over frozen mud, Ghost ranging at his side, eyes wary. When the ice winds howled, he met with the council. Sansa stern and precise, Lady Barbary Dustin sly and shrewd, Tormund irrepressible, Val patient as a stone, Maester Peake endlessly reciting old laws and making new ones to fit the world as it was, not as the Maesters dreamed it. Sir Davos was Joan's shadow, hands scarred, eyes missing nothing, offering counsel that rarely veered from the hard but honest road. One morning, Sansa met Jon in the solar as a blizzard raged beyond the narrow windows. Her hair, rich as autumn wheat, shone in the candlelight. Her face, sharp-boned and pale, carried the memory of many sleepless nights. "The king's hand has sent a letter," she said, dropping it onto the table. "He demands you journey to King's Landing, alone, to justify our counsel and the settlement of the free folk." The tone is not friendly. Jon read the letter, eyes narrowing. "They sense our strength, or our weakness. They fear our example," Sansa said. "If the North can govern itself, and do it peacefully, what stops the Riverlands or the Vale from following?" He nodded. "If I go, will you hold the council?" Her lips quirked. "You think I would not?" "Not for a moment," he admitted, and the smallest smile passed between them, the comfort of shared burdens. That night, after the council debated long on whether Jon should go south, Arya found him on the battlements, watching the snow drift down in wild, tumbling flurries. "Going south again?" she asked, eyes shadowed. "I must," Jon said. "If I refuse, they'll send an army." Arya shrugged. "You've faced worse. Still, don't trust anyone who calls you friend in the Red Keep. And remember, the smallest blade slips deepest." "Then?" Jon smiled. "I had a dozen like you in King's Landing, I'd fear nothing." She grinned, and for a moment, she was only his little sister, the wild girl from Winterfell who used to chase cats in the crypts. But when she hugged him, swift, fierce, he knew the dangers awaiting were not only in gilded halls. Preparations began. Jon would ride south with Davos, Maester Peake, and 2 free folk chiefs, Tormund and Val, along with 10 Karstark riders and a handful of Winterfell men. Ghost would go too, and so would 3 of Arya's silent, hard-eyed friends, who would vanish into the city's shadows at the first chance. The night before his departure, Jon met with the council in the old Godswood. The snow lay thick among the roots, the heart tree's bloody leaves bright against the white. All gathered: lords, spearwives, chieftains, merchant guildsmen, even old Mother Mole, hunched and bell-chiming, who had made the journey in a litter. Jon spoke plainly. "If I do not return, this council endures. Its laws stand. Its purpose stands. No lord, no king, not even a Stark is above it." Now Sansa's gaze was steady as ice. "You will return." Val nodded. "We keep what we build." Tormund slapped Jon's back. "If the Southern Kneelers try tricks, remember, a Giantsbane stands behind you. And if they try chains, well, free folk break them." Jon knelt by the heart tree, pressing his palm to its rough, icy bark. For a moment, the old gods seemed to murmur in the rustle of the wind. Not words, but a deep acceptance, the knowledge that what he did was not for glory, but for those who must live in the world after he was gone. They set out at dawn, the sky brittle with cold. The journey south was slow, the roads rutted and icy, villages wrapped in their own fears. At every holdfast, news of the council preceded them. Some cheered, others spat. A few watched with the haunted eyes of those who had lost too much to ever hope again. At Moat Cailin, the ancient causeway fortress half sunk in black water, they met Lord Ronald Reed, who offered a feast in the mossy Great Hall. Reeds and free folk exchanged wary stories. Davos and Ronald debated the future of the Neck, agreeing on nothing except that war must not return. Beyond the Neck, the fields grew green even in the grip of winter, the air softer. In the towns of the Riverlands, banners hung limp on the breeze. Some crowned stag, some Tully trout. A few with the direwolf, yet the faces Jon saw were tired. Hopeful, always hungry for news of peace. They entered King's Landing beneath a cold drizzle, escorted by gold cloaks resplendent in battered mail. The city stank of smoke and mud, yet its streets hummed with rumor. Jon Snow come from the wild north, a wolf among sheep, bringing free folk and wild dreams of council rule. The Red Keep stood as ever, proud and red and menacing. They were led not to the great throne room but to a private solar, where Tommen Baratheon, still a boy, plump and anxious, sat with his mother, Queen Cersei, and a knot of lords and maesters. Beside Cersei, Jaime Lannister stood, golden and grim, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The High Septon, old and tottering, sat to one side. Mace Tyrell, ruddy and full of false bonhomie, to the other. Jon bowed as custom demanded, then met Tommen's eyes. The boy looked away, but Cersei's gaze held his, sharp and cold as the first bite of winter. "You have come far," she said, "to bring us tales of wildlings and parliaments. Do you now seek a crown for yourself?" Jon shook his head. "No crown, no war, only what is ours by right, the freedom to govern the North, to live in peace." Mace Tyrell laughed. "Peace? In the North? When wildlings run in the fields and men talk of breaking oaths to the Iron Throne?" Davos answered. "The oaths are not broken, only changed. The North pays its debts, sends grain when it can. But the wars of southern kings have cost us dearly. The council is our way forward." Maester Plum, round-faced and keen, interjected. "Many in the Citadel are curious, Lord Snow. A council is not unknown, but equal power for the free folk. Some call it dangerous, others call it wise." Cersei's mouth curled. "And what of the Night's Watch, Lord Snow? You once swore vows to take no lands, wear no crowns, father no children." Jon replied, voice quiet. "The Night's Watch no longer guards the realm of men against the dead. Now it serves the living, mediators, stewards, keepers of the peace. Those vows endure, though the world has changed." "Then," Tommen, mustering courage, asked, "will you send men if the crown calls? Will you pay the king's taxes?" Jon considered. "We will send men if the threat is real, against invaders, against the dead. But we will not send men to fight your southern wars. The North will trade, pay what is fair, nothing more." A tense silence followed. Jaime Lannister, arms crossed, said at last, "You come asking for recognition, not permission." Jon met his eyes. "Recognition, nothing less, nothing more." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "And if we refuse?" Tormund, standing behind Jon, grinned. "Then we go home, and the North stays as it is. We have what we need." The Queen's lip curled. Arrogant for a king with no crown. Val stepped forward, her accent harsh, clear. "We do not need crowns. We have land, people, peace. Your wars have only brought fire and grief. Let us have our world. We'll leave yours to you." The High Septon, surprisingly, spoke next, voice gentle. "Sometimes, my queen, the gods demand new ways be tried. The North's counsel, if it brings peace, if it feeds the hungry and shelters the orphan, perhaps it is not rebellion but renewal." "Ban!" Cersei glared at the old priest, but Tommen seemed soothed by the words. The meeting ended in deadlock. They were offered rooms in the Tower of the Hand. Davos set guards at every door, Arya's spies watching every movement. The next day, word swept the city that the Iron Bank of Braavos had sent an envoy to see Jon. The banker, narrow-faced and smiling, offered lines of credit if the council would guarantee timber and furs. Jon agreed, careful to tie all debts to the council and not his own name. By nightfall, gold was already flowing north, with Braavosi agents hired to audit and inspect, not a boon but a leash, as Maester Peake quietly warned. As days passed, Jon met with envoys from the Riverlands and the Vale, most eager to see the council in action, some quietly offering support. A secret note from Sansa reported news from Winterfell. Trade good, new settlements growing. 2 more southern lords had sent sons to learn from the free folk. The council sat daily, Sansa presiding, Tormund and Val keeping order when tempers flared. No blood spilled. No crops burned. After a week, the Red Keep summoned Jon again. This time, he faced only Tommen, Jaime, and Cersei. The Queen's manner was cold, but Jaime's voice carried a different weight. "You have done what few could, Jon Snow. You brought peace without the sword. It will not last, nothing does, but it is more than most men leave behind." Jon inclined his head. "It lasts as long as we tend it." Cersei's answer was measured. "You will have your recognition. The council may govern, provided the North sends a token of allegiance. A wolf's pelt, perhaps, each year, and a written pledge that no army shall march south unbidden." "Mahal." Jon agreed, and Tommen affixed the royal seal. A letter was drafted. The Iron Throne recognized the Council of Peace, under the rule of its own charter, so long as the peace held. The city buzzed with the news. Bravo sent more gold. The Citadel announced it would send maesters north to study the new schools. Even Mace Tyrell, ever practical, offered seeds and apple rootstock. The night before departing, Jon walked the city walls, Davos at his side. "We won more than we lost," Davos said. "Though we may pay for it one day." Jon smiled faintly. "That's always the way." Davos studied the skyline. "If you ever tire of councils, I know a good shipbuilder in the Stepstones. Peace needs ports too." They laughed, then fell quiet. At dawn, Jon led the company north. Word spread before them. At every inn, every village, people gathered to watch the Wolf Banner pass. Free folk walking side by side, with knights and merchants and maesters. By the time they reached Moat Cailin, a crowd had gathered. Northerners, free folk, even men from the Riverlands, all eager to hear the outcome. Jon stood upon the broken ramparts, the wind fierce and clear. He read aloud the Iron Throne's letter. The seal bright as blood. From this day, the Council of Peace stands, by law and right, to govern the North and the new gift, free and undivided. No lord may claim dominion over another, save by voice and by vote. All children, be they born of keep or tent, are welcome in the schools of the council. The wall shall be maintained as monument and warning, but no longer as prison. The Night's Watch shall serve as wardens and mediators, keepers of the peace. Now, A cheer rose, ragged but strong. The council endured. There were hard seasons, famines, blights, raids that never truly ceased. The free folk and the northern lords quarreled and bargained, built and rebuilt, buried old hatreds like seed in earth, too cold for comfort. But each year, at the Heart Tree in Winterfell's Godswood, they gathered, lords and chieftains, septons and maesters, mothers and merchants and outlaws, each to place a token at the roots, a sign of the burdens and hopes they shared. Jon grew older, gray at the temples, his face marked by the long winters. Ghost walked always at his side, and when he howled, men listened. Children learned letters and the lore of both gods. Villages raised halls together, roofs thatched by many hands. When southern lords sent emissaries, they were greeted not by a king, but by a council, sometimes loud, sometimes foolish, always stubborn, but alive. On the longest night, as the snows drifted deep and the world seemed poised on the edge of another long dark, Jon sat in the great hall with Sansa and Arya, Tormund and Val, Davos and Maester Peake. The fire bright. "Do you ever miss it?" Arya asked, watching the flames. "The road, the war, the old world?" Jon thought of those nights on the wall, the dead marching, the warmth of Ygritte's arms, the cold terror of command, the endless ache of loss. He looked around, at Sansa's quiet strength, at Tormund's raucous laughter, at Ghost asleep by the hearth, at the children's laughter from the kitchens. "I miss some things," he said, voice soft. "But not the world as it was." The fire crackled, the wind keened at the windows, but inside the hall, there was warmth, and hope, and the knowledge that, at least for one more night, the North endured, together. Wow, Undi. Winter's grip slackened by inches and slow degrees. The great snows of that first peace receded, not vanquished but spent, leaving fields that had known only war or wildness rich with new possibility. As the sun lingered longer over the ridges and the river ice gave way to rushing melt, all the north, and the new gift beyond, thawed in more ways than one. In village hall and camp, the work of rebuilding became not a hope, but a rhythm, as constant and stubborn as the tide. Jon Snow found himself busier than he'd ever been in war. Peace, he learned, was 1,000 small labors, none as glorious as victory, and none as simple as defeat. Each morning began in the council's solar, where lords and free folk chiefs argued over stone, seed, and song, hammering out the terms by which new lives would be built. Some days, they wrangled over boundaries or the price of river trout. Other days, over who might hunt in the greenwood, and how the spoils would be shared. The sharpest disputes, often carried by Lady Dustin or Val, were not about blood or banners, but about memory, what wrongs could be forgiven, and which would echo through generations, hardening into new grudges. Jon presided at these sessions as little more than a moderator, or so he told himself. He tried to speak only when needed, letting Sansa's measured logic and Tormund's unvarnished humor steer the mood. Maester Peake grew adept at translating free folk wisdom into language the northern houses trusted, and Davos was the first to volunteer when any point demanded a compromise that tasted bitter to all. Arya slipped in and out, usually silent, but sometimes offering a sharp-edged truth that cleared the air more swiftly than hours of negotiation. Outside the council, Jon's days filled with journeys. He rode far afield to oversee the planting at Hardhome, now a bustling settlement where free folk reeds and mannerly farmers had built a common hall of stone and driftwood above the old shanties. He crossed the White Knife to visit White Harbor, inspecting the new piers, some built by wildling hands, others by Manderley coin, and broke bread with Lord Wyman himself, who pledged to send his youngest grandson to study at Long Barrow School. In Bear Island's mead halls, he listened as Mage Mormont and Val's cousin Civ traded hunting tales over a battered old table, their laughter echoing into the cold night. Most days ended at Winterfell, in Sansa's solar, or beside the Godswood's Heart Tree, Jon's cloak heavy with travel dust, and his mind even heavier. Each evening he wrote, recording the council's decisions and drafting letters north and south, one to Braavos about timber shipments, another to the Reach regarding a new strain of barley, and sometimes to King's Landing, where Tommen, under the wary eye of his mother, responded in measured, lawful tones that suggested he had learned much, and suffered more since the first awkward meetings in the Red Keep. Jon learned to rely on Ghost's steady presence and to trust the new bonds being formed, though he saw the cracks as well as the joins. He knew, as did Sansa, that peace was not a state but a practice, like keeping a hearth fire alive in the heart of winter, always feeding it, always guarding it from the wind. One bright spring morning, Jon met Sansa on the ramparts, the last snows melting in great shining pools below. The sky was a perfect blue, banners snapping in a wind that carried the scents of fresh bread and pine resin. Sansa wore a wool cloak lined with fox, her hair plaited in a way that caught the sunlight, a queen's crown woven from the plainest stuff of the north. "A raven from the Eyrie," she said, handing him the letter. "Lady Sansa Stark and Jon Snow, lord of no titles, but all the burdens." Jon smiled as he broke the wax. "What do they want now? Grain or advice?" "An invitation," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "The Vale wishes to observe the council for themselves. Lord Robert Arryn's regents think it wise to study our charter, perhaps send some of their knights to learn the ways of the free folk." Jon frowned. "Are they hoping to join the council or to unmake it?" "A little of both, I'd wager," Sansa replied. "But the Reach sends grain, and Braavos sends gold. The Vale will not be left behind." Jon glanced over the letter's careful script, picking out phrases like, "in the spirit of unity," and "for mutual learning and protection." He passed it back. "We'll host them, but watch them closely." Sansa's lips curled. "There's a reason I keep the old council minutes under lock and key." He looked out over the yard, watching as free folk children played with Stark hounds, their laughter carried by the wind. The world was changing, whether the Vale liked it or not. Preparations for the Arryn party were meticulous. Sansa oversaw the guest quarters, assigning Lady Barbary to host the knights, a match that left both parties slightly on edge and therefore perfectly suited. Arya disappeared, only to reappear the night before their arrival with detailed notes about each guest's temperament, appetites, and secret weaknesses. Jon rode north to brief the free folk settlements, ensuring their representatives would be present and prepared. The Vale's arrival was marked by a parade of blue and white banners, shining mail, and the slow, cautious courtesy of those who do not trust what they cannot claim. Lord Yohn Royce led the delegation, his weathered face giving nothing away. Behind him came 3 Arryn cousins, a Septon, and a host of lesser knights. The northern lords greeted them with the cool dignity of old blood, while Tormund and Val met them with broad smiles and a meal of roast goat spiced with wild mountain herbs. The council's opening session took place in the new long hall, sunlight streaming through high windows, the air filled with the mingled scents of beeswax, fresh-cut wood, and the green of the world coming back to life. Sansa welcomed the guests in measured tones, reciting the council's founding principles. That no man or woman, free folk or lord, might claim more voice than another. That disputes must be settled by talk, not sword. That land would be shared, schools open, and aid given to the hungry without thought of clan or birth. Lord Royce, solid as an oak, listened in silence, then questioned, firm but not unkind. How justice was kept when old grievances rose. Maester Peake described the council system. 3 judges, drawn by lot, 1 from the north, 1 from the free folk, 1 from the Lord's Circle, each case debated, verdicts made public, the guilty working in service of the injured, never in chains. Val added with pride how the free folk had sent thieves and quarrelers to build bridges and dams beside the men of Molestown, and how, more often than not, those hands returned not as prisoners, but as kin. Royce considered all this, then nodded slowly. Perhaps there is sense in your ways. The Vale has no wish for more blood, but can peace last when the first hard winter comes, when the food runs short, or the old hatreds flare? Jon spoke quietly. Peace is not a wall that keeps out the cold. It is the fire we tend together. The phrase echoed through the hall, and in the following days, as the Arryn party toured the settlements, the council, and the markets of Winterfell, even the most skeptical among them found some merit in what they saw. By the time they departed, Lord Royce left behind a dozen young knights and 2 septons to learn the North's ways. In private, he told Sansa and Jon, "You have forged something rare. If the Vale faces its own storms, may we look to your counsel as guide." Summer came in earnest, rich and green, the days long and golden. With it came new challenges. Plagues of locusts in the barley fields, a fire at the granaries near White Harbor, rumors of ironborn raiders gathering on the shivering sea. The council met each threat with dogged persistence. Free folk warriors joined Manderly men on the coasts, their boats swift and silent. When locusts threatened the crops, Val and Lady Dustin led a drive, burning old grass and driving the swarms into traps. The fire at the granaries, arson, as Arya soon learned, was set by a pair of disgruntled southern merchants who had lost contracts under the new trading rules. They were sentenced not to death, but to build new storehouses with their own hands and labor, alongside those they had sought to ruin. For every challenge, the council answered not with violence, but with labor, with talk, with compromise. Each solution bore the marks of every member's vision, sometimes clashing, always hard-won. One afternoon, as the harvest began and the markets filled with grain, Jon stood with Davos in the square, watching free folk and northerners haggle over beets, trout, and knucklebones. "You know," Davos said, smiling, "I once thought peace meant no more need for smuggling or swords or hard bargains. Now I see it means bargains all the time. Only the goods change." Jon laughed. "Some days I'd take the sword. At least you know where it will cut." Davos nodded. "But swords rust. Good harvests feed children. What you've built here, Jon, it won't last forever, but it's more than most kings ever leave behind." Jon nodded, his eyes tracking a group of children. Free folk, Stark, even a copper-haired Manderly racing to the new school. "It's not me. It's all of them. Sansa, Val, Tormund, Peake. Even Arya, hiding in the shadows." Davos' smile faded. "It still needed you to begin." As autumn neared, envoys from the south arrived. A lord from the Reach seeking trade, a Braavosi merchant demanding payment on loans, a stern woman from the Citadel come to inspect the school at Long Barrow. Sansa presided over every meeting, her patience unflagging. Val and Tormund led the harvest dances, the old bonfires blazing under moon and stars. That year, the first children born of both free folk and northern blood came of age. A dozen households, some in the New Gift, some in Wintertown, celebrated their names at the harvest festival. Jon, asked to speak, said only, "Let them grow in peace as the world grows, season by season. Let them build what we never dared." The bonfires burned late, and the music wove through the night, carrying the promise of a world not divided, but joined. When the first snows returned, Jon stood again at the heart tree. He was older now, his beard streaked with gray, his hands marked by old scars and new lines. Ghost too was grizzled, but his eyes burned bright. Sansa and Arya stood beside him, each changed, each themselves. The council gathered in a great circle, tokens from every house and clan set at the tree's roots, bells and carved stones, woven charms, blades blunted by time. Sansa called the roll, each name answered by a voice from every corner of the north and beyond. Jon listened, the sound swelling, becoming not just a list but a song of survival, of work, of grudges set aside and new ties forged. He knew there would be trouble again, wars, famine, betrayal. He knew some hopes would fail, some bonds break. But as the circle closed, the firelight bright and steady, he allowed himself one moment to believe in what had been built. Peace, he thought, was not an end, but a daily practice. A council not of lords alone, but of all who would work together. It was the heart of the world, beating not in thrones or swords, but in hands joined around a fire. That night, the snow fell soft, and Winterfell shone bright as any king's hall, its windows spilling light and song out into the cold. Awen May. The last leaves of autumn spun down through the chill air, drifting golden and scarlet to carpet the yards of Winterfell and the wide, muddy lanes of the New Gift. Smoke from the harvest fires coiled in the valley's rising fog. mingling with the tang of apple must and pine. In the long shadows of the late year, the works of peace continued. Slow, fractious, but as unyielding as root and stone. Each day began as all days had for many years, with voices. Jon Snow awoke before dawn as he always did. Not by choice but by the old habits of watchfulness and responsibility that refused to leave him. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake the house, and found Ghost already waiting by the door. A silent white shadow whose eyes glowed even in the faintest light. Outside, the air was sharp and still. The sky that peculiar velvet blue that precedes a winter sunrise. Jon's boots crunched over frosted gravel as he made his way to the godswood, his breath pluming in the cold. He stood beneath the heart tree, watching the water in the pool ripple, with the fall of a single leaf. The tree's face seemed more worn with every passing year, as if it too remembered the cost of each choice, each risk, each new hope that was both a danger and a promise. Jon pressed his hand to the bark and whispered a wordless prayer, not for victory or safety, but for wisdom enough to recognize what was worth defending, and what was only a shadow of old pain. Returning to the hall, he found Sansa already in the solar, wrapped in her heavy blue robe, ink staining her fingers as she drafted another long letter to the council in White Harbor. Arya lounged by the fire, her boots muddy, eyes bright and unreadable. Tormund's laughter echoed from the yard, where he was already drilling a mixed group of Mormont shield maidens and free folk boys in the art of the spear. The sound of their shouts mingled with the crack and ring of hammers from the new forge, and the cries of merchants in the market square haggling over saltfish and barley. It was the council's day to meet, and the solar filled quickly. Val with her sun-bright hair and wolfskin cloak, Maester Peake carrying a folio of parchments, Lady Dustin with her dry wit and sharp eyes, Davos stooped but keen as ever. From Bear Island, Maeg Mormont arrived with her daughters, and from the new gift came Mother Mole, carried in her wheeled chair, her cloak thick with bells and wildflowers. The day's agenda was long and contentious. The matter of the new bridge at Long Lake dominated the first hours. Northern carpenters argued with free folk stonemasons over the best site, while merchants from the towns pressed for lower tolls, and spearwives demanded a say in the placement of the guard post. Jon kept his temper, steering the talk to compromise. A wooden span, with free folk labor and northern iron, and the tolls to be split between the council and the orphans' fund. The vote passed, not unanimously but decisively, and Maester Peake made a note for the record. After that, the talk turned to food. Stores were running low in Mole's Town and along the Frostwater, and a summer hailstorm had ruined much of the rye in the western fields. Sansa recommended rationing, while Tormund suggested sending a band north to hunt aurochs on the tundra. Val offered a middle road. The free folk would share their preserved meats if the Northmen would provide salt and oats in return. The deal struck. Jon saw the tension ease, a subtle nod from Lady Dustin confirming that, at least for now, old grudges could be suspended for necessity's sake. It was late afternoon before the most difficult subject arose. A delegation of Vale Knights, still observing the council's workings, requested that their own disputes, land, water, even a marriage contract on Sar, be heard and settled by the North's Council as an experiment in mutual justice. The room fell silent. Jon glanced at Sansa, who read the room with a politician's grace. "It is a risk," she said, voice calm but edged. "If we become the court for every neighboring realm, our purpose will be lost. But it is a chance," Maester Peake ventured, "to show the world that the council's way can work for all free folk, not just those of the North." Arya shrugged, a rare smile on her lips. "I say let them try. If their knights can stomach our justice, perhaps they'll bring better manners next time." Tormund snorted. "Let them taste our counsel. If they spit it out, they can go back to their bloody duels." Jon weighed their words. "We do this once," he said, "and only if all parties agree to abide by our law, as written. No appeals to southern kings or lords." Val nodded. "And the judgment will be given by one of us, one Northman, and one from the Vale." The Vale men, stiff with pride, agreed. The cases were heard in the open yard over 3 days. Jon presided, flanked by Val and Sir Donald Waynwood. a Vale knight with a steady voice and a sense of fairness. The council's judgments were sharp but measured. Land was divided, water rights settled, the marriage contract annulled with a fine paid to both families and a promise of trade. When it was done, Sir Donald thanked the council in public, admitting, "Your justice is swift and sometimes strange, but fair. I'll bring word to my lord, and perhaps the Eyrie will send more cases, not fewer." After the Vale delegation departed, Sansa and Jon walked the walls, the first stars coming out overhead. "We did something strange today," she said. "We've done stranger," he replied, thinking of the first night the free folk feasted in the Hall of Winterfell. "Maybe," Sansa smiled. "But if the Vale and the Reach send their own to learn from us, what happens next?" Jon watched the wind stir the snow at their feet. Perhaps peace spreads, as war once did. Or perhaps it stirs new threats. But we meet them together. She linked her arm in his. Together. In the months that followed, the council's justice became known throughout the Seven Kingdoms, and even beyond. Lords and envoys, sometimes out of hope, more often out of suspicion or desperation. A group of Ironborn arrived under a banner of truce, asking for the council's mediation in a blood feud that threatened to spill over onto northern shores. Free folk, cautious but proud, accepted the challenge, and Arya herself led the talks, her daggers always visible, but never drawn. One day, a woman of Dorne arrived with a scroll from Sunspear, requesting council advice on a water dispute between rival villages. She stayed through 2 council sessions, watched the way Northerners and wildlings wrangled, and finally declared, "Your way is slow, but it saves blood. That is more precious than gold in Dorne." She returned home with a copy of the council's charter and a cask of Wintertown's sour red wine. Word reached the Citadel, and more maesters came north, some to observe, others to teach. They were joined by Braavosi bankers, curious reachmen, even a handful of Westerland's goldsmiths, who at first expected to be robbed by wildlings, but soon learned their work was valued, paid in northern silver, and their knowledge of coin and contract welcomed in a world where barter and custom often clashed. The council changed with the times. What began as a group of lords and chieftains grew to include merchants, shipwrights, healers and priests, 7 gods and old gods alike. The meetings were louder, sometimes more bitter, but always marked by the memory of what had been lost, and what could be won, if only peace held. The children of the New North grew up in a world their parents barely recognized. They spoke 2 languages, Common and the Old Tongue, learned to hunt with spear or bow, to read and write, to judge a man by his word and a woman by her deed. They played in the shadow of Winterfell's walls, and in the wild woods beyond the New Gift, running with wolf pups and swimming in clear streams. Jon watched them, pride and sorrow mingling in his heart. He saw children of free folk and Stark, of Reed and Karstark, even of Lannister and Manderly, laughing together, learning together, sometimes fighting but always returning in the end to the same fire. Ghost became the terror and wonder of every youngling, his white pelt a badge of courage for any who dared touch him. Val's daughter Sigrid was said to ride a bear cub bareback by the age of 6, and Lady Mormont's son, Davos, could already recite the old laws and the new. The elders too changed, though more slowly. Tormund grew grayer and rounder, but never lost his booming laugh. Sansa became both feared and loved, the Lady of Winterfell and the council's heart. Arya, restless as ever, came and went, sometimes gone for months or even a year, but always returning with new tales, new faces, and new lessons learned in distant lands. Jon himself grew older, his hair shot with silver, his hands marked by frost and years of writing and war. He had never married, though more than one woman, north and south, had offered. He found his home in the council, in his family, and in the bond he shared with Ghost. Some nights he walked the walls alone, listening to the wind, and thought of all those who had come before and all those yet to come. Then came a winter harder than any since the long night, a winter that swept from the shivering sea to the neck, and from the Frostfangs to the stony hills of Dorne. Crops failed, herds perished, rivers froze solid. For a time, it seemed the council would be tested beyond all endurance. Hungry men and women came to Winterfell from every corner of the realm, seeking food, shelter, hope. The council acted. Grain was rationed. The halls opened to all. Patrols sent south to guide refugees through blizzard and drift. When a village near the rills rebelled, threatening to raid its neighbors, Sansa rode out herself, Tormund at her side. She did not threaten or bargain, but simply opened the council stores, offering bread for oaths of peace. The village bent, and the raids ceased. As famine deepened, the free folk led great hunts into the mountains, returning with game for the stewpots of every settlement. The Night's Watch, reborn as mediators and scouts, guided starving families over the wall to the safety of the new gift, no longer a forbidden land, but a refuge for all. Maester Peake and the new maesters worked miracles with little, stretching herbs and medicines, teaching mothers to care for their sick when no healer could reach them. Jon moved among the people every day, his presence both comfort and warning. Ghost, leaner now, led rescue parties through the deep snows, his howls guiding lost travelers home. There were deaths, too many to count, but there were also births, children named for hope and for mercy, born in the bitterest months and swaddled in wolf furs. As the spring finally returned, slow and cautious, the North and the free folk had survived. The world had changed, and the council's bond held fast. In the years that followed, Jon Snow became known not as king, not even as lord, but as the Hand of Peace, the one who remembered the cost of every quarrel, the one whose name was invoked when compromise seemed impossible. When at last he grew old and tired, he stepped back, letting others lead. Sansa presided over the council, her wisdom deepened by years of hardship and hope. Arya, ever restless, trained new generations of scouts and peacemakers, her legend growing in the telling. The council endured. Storms and wars came, but the North held. Trade flourished, not only with the Vale and the Riverlands but with distant lands across the sea. The new gift became a crossroads, a place where cultures mingled and new stories began. One winter, when Jon was nearly 70, a vast gathering was held in Winterfell's great yard. Lords and chieftains, free folk and maesters, priests and merchants, children and elders. They feasted beneath lanterns, the tables heavy with food, the air filled with laughter and song. Jon stood at the center, Sansa and Arya beside him, and spoke to the assembly. We were told once that the wall was the end of the world, and that peace was an illusion. But look around you. This council, this hall, this hope, is not the work of kings, but of many hands, many voices, many hearts. Would that be our legacy? Let that be our legacy. Let the world remember not our banners or our battles, but the peace we forged, one day at a time. The cheers rang long and loud. That night, Jon walked the Godswood one last time, Ghost at his side, the moon bright through the bare branches. He knelt by the heart tree, his hands on the roots, and gave thanks for sorrow and joy, for friends lost and found, for the stubborn hope that had made all the difference. He was only one man, and his watch was ending. But the council endured and would endure, as long as people remembered why it had begun. In the heart of winter, Jon Snow finally knew peace, not just for himself, but for the world he left behind. Hoa Kai Mre. Years passed, and the world turned beneath its mantle of seasons. In the north, the cycle of hardship and hope continued. Winters of gnawing hunger and blizzards, summers thick with green, autumns burning gold. The council Jon Snow had built, born of war and necessity, became less a novelty and more a pillar, a way of life that children learned as their fathers had once learned sword and shield. And through all these years, Jon lived quietly at Winterfell. His name often invoked, his will seldom imposed, his presence as steady and understated as the ancient stones themselves. As Jon's hair silvered and the creases deepened beside his dark eyes, he carried himself less like a lord and more like an old black brother walking the wall. Quiet, watchful, observant, yet always ready to answer when called. His days began in the early blue hush before dawn, walking the battlements with Ghost. The direwolf's muzzle now grizzled, and his pace slower, but his eyes undimmed. John made time for small mercies, sharing a story with a lonely page, tasting the day's porridge with the children in the kitchens, checking the gates himself even when the guards protested it beneath him. In the solar, Sansa ruled with a pen as sharp as a Valyrian blade. Her hair faded to the color of autumn wheat, but her mind only sharpened with age. She wrote hundreds of letters, orders, judgments, treaties. Her seal recognized from Bear Island to Gulltown, and as far as distant Pentos. Arya, half mythical by now, drifted in and out of Winterfell with the turning of the years, bringing wild rumors and rare gifts. A dagger for a promising girl, a new story for the council's youngest page, a warning when threats gathered on the horizon. The council chamber swelled as the realm changed. Once a table for a handful of lords and chiefs, now it stretched the length of Winterfell's rebuilt Long Hall. Free folk sat cheek by jowl with northern barons. Braavosi merchants scribbled on ledgers beside Reed Cranagman. Manderley sea captains sipped broth alongside Bear Island's shield maidens. At the head, Sansa presided, flanked by Val, Lady Dustin, Mother Mole, and a rotating cast of septons, maesters, and even septus from the distant southern faiths. The hall buzzed with the constant hum of commerce, argument, compromise, and innovation. Jon kept to the edge, his words measured, always urging patience and reminding the quarrelsome that the alternative to negotiation was ruin. He had seen enough of ruin to last 10 lifetimes. One autumn, as harvest feasts approached, Jon was summoned by Samwell Tarly, now the North's High Maester, his round face lined with the care of years and his eyes forever gentle and hopeful. Sam's raven perched on the window, croaking at the dawn. "We've had a message from Oldtown," Sam announced, placing a sealed scroll on Jon's desk. "The Archmaesters wish to send apprentices to study the Council's experiment, and the Citadel requests that you come to witness the appointment of the first woman to take the Archmaester's chain." Jon turned the scroll, tracing the wax seal. "It seems peace spreads faster than war these days." Sam smiled, tired but proud. "Not as fast as rumor, Jon. But they say the Reach has begun copying our council model in Golden Grove, and the Riverlands have sent word of a moot at Fairmarket." Jon nodded. "Send them our charter, our codes, and our mistakes. The last are as important as the first." "Nam, shall I go south?" Sam offered. "You'd teach more in a week there than I could in a year." "But if I went, they'd argue, not listen. Take a dozen pages, and Maester Willa from Last Hearth. She's fierce enough to make them pay attention." Sam agreed, a gentle glow of satisfaction in his face. Jon clasped his arm. "You were always the best of us, Sam. Go with our hopes." The North changed beneath the Council's patient hand. Where once every hamlet guarded its own and eyed strangers with suspicion, now the roads were safer, patrols drawn from both North and Free folk ranging together. The school at Long Barrow was joined by others. One at White Harbor, another in the New Gift, a third on Bear Island. Each open to any child, kin or fosterling, lord or orphan, wildling or kneeler. Maesters traveled between them, teaching healing, writing, law, and the tangled necessary skills of compromise. Old enmities faded, not forgotten but transformed by the daily habit of shared labor. The Manderley fleet grew, now half crewed by free folk who, 3 generations ago, had never seen the sea. Karstark herdsmen and then traders met each market day to swap stories and salt beef. Even the children of the old enemies, Bolton and Reed, Glover and Magnar, played at council in the yards, dividing pebbles for votes and arguing, endlessly, who would stand for judge. Some traditions remained. Each spring, the council gathered at the Heart Tree in Winterfell's Godswood. They arrived with tokens: a woven ring, a painted arrow, a handful of salt, a smooth river stone. Gifts placed at the roots in memory of what had been lost, and in hope of what might yet be built. Jon always spoke last, his words simple, never rehearsed, meant for the living and the dead. "We are not the same as we were," he would say, "nor should we wish to be. Each spring the snow gives way, and something new grows where the old was buried. So let it be with us. New crises rose, as they always would. Famine came again when late frosts killed the barley. But the council's granaries, built for such a day, saw the people through. Sickness swept through the villages one spring. Ague and fever. But the school's healers staved off death, and the dead were mourned in the old ways and the new. The Ironborn raided again, but found the coasts guarded by fleets of mixed crews, no longer a soft target, but a wall of shields and oars. A new threat came from the south, not in arms but in golden promises. Merchants from Lannisport and Bravos, eager to buy up lands or set taxes on the new gifts' bustling markets. The council, forewarned, enacted new charters. Lands could not be sold to outsiders, and all trade must pass through the council's hands. Some muttered about overreach, but Jon's voice, still weighty, still calm, reminded them all what it had cost to win this fragile order. Arya returned that year, older, scarred but unbowed, her hair cut short, and her step brisk. She told tales of the distant east, Yeti and Ashai, the Jade Sea and islands. No map yet held, then vanished again, training a new generation of spies, scouts, and peacemakers. Sansa's rule was unchallenged, and her children, and their children after them, grew to adulthood with the expectation that peace was not a pause in history, but its foundation. Years blurred to decades. The council became legend, and then custom. Children studied its founding as they once studied the wars of kings. The wall itself, once a symbol of division, was maintained as a place of learning, a monument, and in the deepest winter, a watchtower still. The Night's Watch endured, not as jailers or warriors, but as guides, mediators, and keepers of the peace. Some of the old castles were restored not as outposts, but as meeting places, where folk from north and south might resolve disputes before they became feuds. Jon aged gracefully, beloved by the people, but never crowned, always simply Jon. His hair grew white, his beard close-cropped, Ghost's muzzle frosted to silver, and the great direwolf grew thin, yet never left Jon's side. The pair became a familiar sight, walking the wall at dawn, or watching the children in the yards, or sitting together in the Godswood, silent beneath the heart tree. Sansa's children, her daughter Lys, her sons Eddard and Rickon, grew into leaders in their own right. Lys became Lady of Winterfell, inheriting her mother's patience and her father's quiet pride. The council shifted to the younger generation, who made new alliances, argued fresh disputes, but always returned, as the sun returned after the long night, to the core truth. Peace, built and rebuilt, was their inheritance. When the time came, Jon called the council to the Godswood once more. The hall was crowded, lords and free folk, old and young, septons and spearwives, children with their eyes bright in the firelight. Ghost, too old to run, lay curled beside Jon's bench, his head resting on Jon's foot. Jon stood, his bones aching, but his voice sure. He looked around at the faces gathered. Val, her hair white as snow, Tormund's grandchildren, boisterous and red-bearded, Mother Mole's niece, bells tinkling in her braid, Sansa's children, solemn and strong. "We began as enemies, bound by fear and anger," Jon said. "We became allies by need. But what we built here was never about enemies or need. It was about the choice we made, to share the world, not divide it, to argue and struggle, not slaughter, to listen, and sometimes to yield." He paused, his eyes damp with memory. "My watch is ending. I have given what I could. The rest is yours, to hold or to squander. Remember the cold, and the dead, and the darkness we faced. Remember what peace cost. Remember that it must be chosen every day." And he knelt beside Ghost, running his fingers through the direwolf's matted fur. The hall was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft sigh of wind in the branches. That night, Jon walked the walls of Winterfell alone, as he had so many years before. The aurora flickered green and violet above the wall's distant spine. In the yards below, children's laughter rang out. Children of free folk and Northmen, of every house and clan, their games a tangled dance of new alliances and old tales. John watched them, his heart full. He returned to the Godswood, kneeling beneath the heart tree one last time, his breath misted in the air. He closed his eyes and whispered a final prayer, not for himself, but for all those yet to come, who would inherit what he and so many others had built. In the quiet that followed, Jon Snow passed peacefully from the world he had helped reshape. At his side, Ghost howled once, a lonely, gentle sound, then lay his head across Jon's legs and was still. They buried Jon in the Godswood, beneath the heart tree's sheltering boughs. The council gathered to remember him, each placing a token on his barrow. A stone, a lock of hair, a page of law, a bit of bone, a shard of glass, a bell, a carved wolf, a woven bracelet, an arrow, a ring. Sansa stood beside the mound and spoke, her voice strong. He was never a king. He needed no crown. His gift was peace. Let us keep it, as he kept his watch. That's bad. For many years, the story of Jon Snow, the Hand of Peace, was told at firesides and council tables from the neck to the shivering sea. His name became not only a memory, but a promise. And the council he began, the world he helped mend, endured long after his bones turned to dust beneath the white heart tree. And on quiet nights, when the aurora danced above Winterfell and the direwolves sang on the wind, folk would say that Jon Snow and Ghost walked the woods together still, guardians of a peace hard won, and never quite finished, holding the North in their silent, watchful gaze. In the years after Jon Snow's death, as his bones settled deep in the Godswood under the shelter of the old heart tree, and the direwolf Ghost slept his last sleep beside him, the world went on. It was the way of things, even in a land that kept memory as stubbornly as it kept the cold. Snow fell, seasons turned, and the council Jon had forged continued, sometimes haltingly, sometimes embattled, but always with the hard-won wisdom that peace is a thing that must be remade, not inherited. Winterfell itself changed. Its stones still held the warmth of old fires and old griefs, but each passing year brought new faces to its halls, new laughter to its yards. The castle rang with the voices of children, grandchildren, and fosterlings from every house and clan. Children with brown skin and pale golden hair and black, green eyes and blue, and the brash accents of free folk mingling with the softer vowels of the North. Where once the arrival of southern envoys was an occasion for suspicion and watchfulness, now they came as friends or rivals, not conquerors or threats, and were welcomed in the great hall beneath banners that showed not only wolves, but the stylized trees and symbols of a dozen families and tribes. Lys Stark, Sansa's daughter and Jon's niece, became Lady of Winterfell. She was neither warlike nor timid, a woman with her mother's poise and her uncle's bluntness, whose gift was for listening and for drawing out the quiet ones, the angry ones, the bitter and the proud. She married twice, first to a wildling singer from Hardhome, then, after his death in a river accident, to a quiet, bookish son of House Reed. Both unions brought new bonds, and with them, new debates and old jokes about the stubbornness of Starks and the sharp tongues of free folk. Her children, one after another, were sent south to foster with allies in the Vale or the Riverlands. And free folk boys and girls took their places as wards and pages at Winterfell. Each year, on the first day of true spring, the council gathered beneath the heart tree to renew its oaths. Lords and free folk, merchants and maesters, shield maidens and singers all came together, sometimes after days of hard travel. The council's charter had grown. Pages and amendments, articles on trade, rules for the dividing of land, the rights of orphans and fosterlings, new protocols for justice and for mediation when the law could not decide. Yet at its core, the charter remained Jon's vision. No man or woman above the council, each voice heard, no sword drawn save in self-defense, and the Night's Watch still standing as neutral mediators in all disputes. Some years the spring meeting was joyous, feasts running late into the night, and children running wild through the grass. Some years it was tense. Old wounds reopened, a border quarrel with the Vale, a famine along the White Knife, or an outbreak of fever that sent tempers flaring. Yet always the council found its way back to compromise. Usually after long hours and sometimes bitter words. More than once because Lys or Val, or one of Tormund's clever granddaughters, found a third way where none seemed possible. The custom grew that at each council's close, every member would place a token at the roots of the heart tree, a stone, a scrap of cloth, a bead, a coin, a bent arrow, a lock of hair. By Jon's grave, these tokens rose in a small mound. A monument not to war or conquest, but to the slow, stubborn building of peace. Over time, the Night's Watch itself was transformed. The wall, no longer a bulwark against a vanished enemy, became a network of refuges and schools, its old castles repurposed as meeting houses, granaries, and way stations for travelers. The Black Brothers were joined by Black Sisters, women who preferred the open sky and the service of the realm to marriage or commerce, some from noble families, some from the wild hills. Their vows were the old ones, but their duties were new, guiding lost travelers, mediating disputes, teaching letters and numbers to the children of shepherds and spearwives. Some castles hosted great fairs, drawing folk from every corner of the north and the wild lands. Others became places of learning, where the stories of both old gods and the new were kept alongside the annals of the council. Many years after Jon's passing, a threat rose from the east, a war in the free cities that sent thousands of refugees streaming through White Harbor and across the narrow sea. Some in the council feared the influx. New tongues, new customs, new faiths. Voices were raised, old grievances recalled, even a riot or two in the alleys of White Harbor, or the market squares of Wintertown. Yet Lys and her council chose welcome. Land was set aside in the new gift, and soon villages with unfamiliar roofs, painted doors, and the sense of strange spices grew beside the old timber halls. The newcomers brought crafts and songs, and their children, dark-haired, olive-skinned, laughing, learned the same oaths and ran the same fields as those whose grandfathers had once called them stranger. A new winter brought hardship, cold that froze the rivers and killed the apple buds, wolves roaming the hills, hunger in the poorer homes. The council acted as it had been taught. Grain from the southern storehouses was sent north. Work parties formed to gather firewood and hunt. The Night's Watch, now grown to include folk from Braavos and beyond, led rescue missions through the drifts, and every survivor who was found was hailed in the spring with songs and feasts. Lys grew old, but her daughter and her daughter's daughters took her place, and the council's work continued. No peace was ever perfect. There were killings in the shadows, feuds that smoldered for years, famines that tested the patience and resolve of even the most determined. There were times when war seemed near, when the king's hand in King's Landing threatened new taxes, or a free folk chieftain demanded independence, or a Braavosi merchant tried to buy up half the new gift. Yet in each crisis, the council held. Men and women who had never spoken before found themselves arguing, then negotiating, then working side by side. Through it all, Jon Snow's memory lingered, not as a king or a conqueror, but as a man who chose compromise over vengeance, who kept faith with both the dead and the living, who reminded each generation in turn that peace is not won by one man or one victory, but by the patient, painful work of many. The songs written for him were quiet, sung at the firesides. A song of winter's end, of wolves and white shadows, of the hand that turned the wheel of peace. On the 100th anniversary of Jon's death, the council gathered as always at Winterfell. The hall was crowded with children and old folk, free folk and lords, strangers from the south, the east, and even the distant Summer Isles. The mound of tokens beside Jon's grave was higher than a man's chest, bright with glass and shell and painted wood. Ghosts' descendants, white direwolves, now rare, but still revered, watched from the shadows. The new lady of Winterfell, a dark-eyed woman with the stubborn jaw of the Starks and the wry smile of the free folk, stood before the council. She lifted a cup carved from heartwood and poured a libation over Jon's grave, the water running down into the tangled roots and stone. "We are here because those before us chose peace," she said, her voice carrying through the godswood and out into the waiting dusk. They chose it every day and paid its price every day. We will do the same. The council, standing in a circle, repeated the ancient oath, and one by one, each member laid their token on the mound. That night, as the aurora danced green and blue above the walls of Winterfell, the people of the north feasted in the halls and yards. Children ran laughing through the trees, and the great fires burned bright. High above, the moon rode behind a veil of cloud, and somewhere, in the rustle of the leaves and the howl of the wind, it seemed that a wolf spirit moved, watching over all that had been built, and all that would yet be made. No single hand could hold the peace forever, nor could any one council or family ensure it always. But so long as there were voices joined in the godswood, tokens placed at the tree's roots, and stories told of the long, hard labor of peace, Jon Snow's legacy endured. And the North, by counsel, by oaths, by the memory of winter and the promise of spring, remained a land remade not by conquest, but by the courage to listen and the stubborn hope to build, year after patient, unending year.